Ladies, gentlemen, and tarnished of all ages, Shadow of the Erdtree is releasing to the world in just a few hours, and thank you to Bandai Namco, we have been playing the DLC early, and without spoiling anything, it is absolutely incredible. So directly from someone who has now played the expansion properly, and of course without going into any sort of actual proper spoilers, let's talk about what you need to know to have a solid start in Shadow of the Erdtree, of course only showing and talking about already released information and footage of extremely early game stuff, just with a bit of a different perspective, let's say. First things first, levels and scadutree blessings. Scadutree blessings increase both your damage and defense by 5% per upgrade that you do with them. There are 20 total upgrades that you can do, and while there has been some community discussion about whether it will be considered fair to use a lot of them or to avoid them entirely, from our own experience, I would say that you at minimum want to get to level 10 out of 20 on your blessing. That is more than acceptable to be able to hit, because you will sooner rather than later reach a point where enemies start absolutely chunking you as far as the actual damage they deal, and they'll also start taking extremely little damage from you. As for what level that you should be, honestly, I don't think that you'd be making it too easy if you went in at absolutely max 99 in every stat, and I don't think it would be too hard going in at level 125. The real scale of difficulty in the expansion is by far these scadutree fragments and blessings, and of course there is a variance within that based on your level as well, but the blessings matter much more than your level by a truly remarkable amount. So just don't worry about it outside of if you want to stay in PvP meta level range. Second, consider unusual paths or solutions to problems. There are various quests, interactions, spells, and even full-on areas in the DLC that are unbelievably easy to miss, and a number of these require you to do things that most players just won't even consider doing. And if you did consider it, you'd probably think it was silly or a joke and then probably not do it anyways, until it works and then suddenly you've advanced a quest line that you didn't even know existed beforehand. Or maybe it fell down a hole by accident and suddenly it's an actually intentionally created dungeon to explore. Just stay on your toes. Keep your mind open to every potential solution and try weird things. You really will not regret it. On a similar note, don't underestimate the expansion. If you have a picture of the size of the map in your head, you're wrong. It's bigger than that. But it isn't wide like the base game map, regions attached at the hip, things like that. It is instead deep. It is extremely vertical. It is layered with zones on top of each other like an onion of Elden Ring. And this makes every little bit of exploration feel almost like it's endless. It rarely feels like you hit a dead end when you are exploring. But if you think you are, there is often a way around that dead end if you think a little bit more vertically instead of horizontally, so you want to keep that in your mind. I will say, while the size of the map is large, there are less like standard default caves around the place, density-wise, than there is in the base game. However, each individual cave type thing that you find is far, far more meaningful. It is larger, it is more unique, and the same goes for the actual layouts within them, the enemies, the rewards, and sometimes even the bosses as well. All of that to say, if you thought exploration was rewarding in base Elden Ring, it is even more so in the DLC to a ridiculous degree. You won't necessarily find things quite as often as you did, but every time you find an area, it will be more meaningful, far more so, and it will have multiple paths with multiple rewards inside of it if you explore it fully. Next up, and this one does need to be a little bit more vague, but not every important enemy in this DLC has a boss health bar. Just because you approach something that looks like it might be imposing or special and a name doesn't pop up, that doesn't mean it isn't worth killing or that it doesn't drop anything good for you. If it looks funky, if it's in a special looking location, and most importantly, if it isn't actually a friendly NPC, of course, give it a kill and see what it drops, because you likely won't regret the choice. Past that, if you're here, you probably are at least aware that there are multiple new weapon types and playstyles as a result of that within the DLC, so I do feel the need to mention that in particular, there is a more basic weapon version within each of these new weapon categories, all of which are findable within the first map tile that you enter the DLC in. I won't say specific locations or anything like that in this video, of course, just to say that if these new weapon types are something that interests you, early exploration will absolutely reward you. In relation to that as well, really, just genuinely, do not be afraid to try out new weapons or builds in this DLC as you truck your way through it and find things. There are more larval tiers in this realm of Shadow to respec your stats. There are tons of ancient dragon smithing and somber smithing stones, and there are even max level gloveworts as well. So things that were limited in the base game for the final upgrades of power for certain items simply have more available in the expansion. So if you are out of the base game ones, there are more to gather. So you can be a little bit loosey-goosey here. You want to play with a weapon or two that you find particularly interesting along the way. Just don't be afraid. Then finally, a couple of more specific combat related tips as you go into the DLC. First, have access to a second damage type. As is the case with the later game bosses in the base game as well, there are a lot of enemies in the DLC with incredibly high resistances to one type of damage or another. If your main weapon is bleed based and you hit a bleed resistant boss, you are going to struggle significantly more than you would otherwise. That said, there are ways to do damage of different types with every main stat. Arcane can focus on statuses, or it can focus on physical. Faith can focus fire, it can focus lightning, or you can go holy as your main focus. Every stat has some level of access to at least a weapon that scales with it that does some sort of off-element damage, and I would recommend investing in a weapon or a playstyle that both still fits your current stat spread, but also offers a secondary choice for if an enemy is resistant to your main build's type, because resistances can really get quite hefty if you aren't careful. In a similar vein to that then, if you are really struggling, especially early and especially on bosses, there is a sort of inbuilt trick to get around some of what makes Shadow of the Erdtree hard. Earlier I was talking about these scadutree fragments and blessings and how it feels like the main difficulty scaling of the expansion. Well, the reason for that is because enemies start to hit so hard and take so little damage that it feels nearly required to use these. That said, there are some ways to fight where your own damage isn't necessarily the most relevant, because things like bleed, frostbite, poison, deadly poison, and importantly specifically scarlet rot, all as statuses as debuffs, apply damage to the enemy based on their own maximum health. So in a way, these effects specifically are a lot more potent at low scadutree blessing levels than they are at high blessing levels, because they don't care about your own personal power as much as they do just flatly scaling off of how strong your enemy actually is. So put simply, the larger the power difference between you and a boss, the stronger these statuses are, and that is absolutely worth keeping in mind when considering how to tackle difficult situations in the DLC. And then, super lastly, don't feel forced to fight a remembrance boss the second that you find them. If it feels like the fight is too tough or unbalanced after you do it a couple of times, maybe you just need to be more powerful. Sure, it might be killable in your current state if you sit there for an hour, wipe back to back to back, and learn it really properly, and some people are really into that, but chances are you're probably meant to round back here later. It's probably intended to do so. The greatest lesson in base Elden Ring is given by the initial tree sentinel teaching you that you don't need to overcome every single obstacle the first time it's on your screen, and that really does apply to a lot of the strongest foes in the DLC as well. And that just about does it for today then, really, everyone. Before I go any further than this, because I think I would just run the risk of getting spoilery, and I don't want to spoil a single goddamn thing in this masterpiece of an expansion. So I wish you all the absolute best of luck going into it. You're all in for an absolutely incredible and challenging time, and I hope these tips can help you ease your way into that just to make it a little bit smoother for you all. Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.